Today we're going to talk about sentences. Now, sentences seem to give writers a lot of trouble sometimes. Students in writing classes see that they have errors with their sentences, or their teachers tell them that they have errors with their sentences. So I think to begin, we should really look at what a sentence is. We're going to have a series of 3 videos here. This first one, we're going to look at just what a sentence is made out of. And then in the second and third, we'll look at specific kinds of problems that people have with sentences, how to identify those problems, and how to fix them. So we're going to start today with this question: what is a sentence? Well, let's start by taking a look at some examples. A, cute puppies running around. B, my sister sold her house. C, raising organic fruits and vegetables. D, one of the largest cities in northern Japan. E, the puppies are playing. Now, all of these look like sentences. They start with a capital letter, they end with a period, and there's words in between. But in fact, they're not all sentences. Sometimes we say that a sentence expresses a complete thought. So, using that definition, which of these examples expresses a complete thought? Hopefully you chose B and E. My sister sold her house and the puppies are playing. These are complete thoughts. The others just seem like pieces or fragments. They need more. Like, you could maybe say, look at those cute puppies running around. That would be a complete sentence. Or, raising organic fruits and vegetables can be profitable. That would be a complete sentence. If you were able to identify B and E as complete sentences, this means you have a sense of what makes a sentence. In grammatical terms, you were able to see that a sentence is a group of words that includes a subject and a predicate. Now, you might not have known that terminology, but that's not really important. Let's look at these 2 concepts, subject and predicate. In simple terms, the subject is a thing that does something, and the predicate says what it does. My sister sold her house. The puppies are playing. Let's look closer at the subject. Again, one way to look at it is this. The subject is the thing or person or idea or entity or puppy that does something. And the predicate tells us what is done. In our first example sentence here, my sister is the one that's making the action. She's making something happen. And of course, in the second sentence, the puppies are doing the action. So now let's consider the predicate. The predicate is the part of the sentence that tells us what the subject is doing. In our examples, it's sold her house, or are playing. As you may know, the predicate includes a verb. In our examples, sold and are playing are verbs. The concept of predicate is just sort of a larger thing that includes the verb plus any objects that the verb might have. For example, my sister sold her house. Her house is the object of the verb. Sometimes we have objects, sometimes we don't. And you don't really need to know too much about these terms, as long as you have that sense that a sentence involves a complete idea. To make it easier for readers to see what our sentences, where our sentences begin and end, we use some graphical touches. We start with a capital letter, we end with end punctuation, usually a period. Sentences in English always start with capital letters, always end with end punctuation. And believe me, this is a good thing. In the old days, in old manuscripts, you would see very often inconsistent punctuation, sometimes no punctuation, sometimes no spaces between words. This stuff was really hard to read. Nowadays, we make it easy. Capital letter begins a sentence, and punctuation ends a sentence. We have three, count them, three possibilities for end punctuation. Period, most common, neutral, and then the exclamation point and the question mark. Neither of these two examples is a question, so we can get rid of this. If you find this really exciting, you could use an exclamation point. My sister sold her house. The puppies are playing. By the way, if it's not capitalized and punctuated as a sentence, this same combination of subject predicate, it's called a clause. Basically, it's a thing that's ready to be a sentence if you want it to be a sentence. If you add those finishing touches, capital letter and punctuation. But clauses can also be put together in different ways to make compound and complex sentences because, you know, the details are what make life interesting, right? And we'll see a lot more of that in the next videos. Back to the predicate. As I said, the main business of the predicate is the verb. No verb, no predicate. No predicate, no sentence. In fact, the verb is all that's really needed. The simplest kinds of sentences have only a subject and a verb. The boy runs. Beyonce sings. Usually we think of the verb as a word that tells us the action of the sentence. Run, sing, fly, dance, write, rise. And the subject is the doer of the action. Some examples. The boy runs. Birds sing. Airplanes fly. Dancers dance. The student writes. Smoke rises. In all of these cases, we can imagine action and the thing doing the action. We can picture it in our minds. But, there's always a but, right? A lot of times, the subject doesn't really do anything, and the verb isn't really an action. For example, geology interests me. Well, geology here isn't really taking any action, and interests isn't really an action. But I think you can see how geology is the subject and interests is the verb in this sentence, is the predicate. Here's another example. Good sentences require attention to detail. Require, not really an action, but again, you probably can figure out what the subject and what the predicate is there. There are a lot of verbs that really don't describe actions. Here's a few of them. These verbs all describe states of being or possession or preferences and so on. Finally, there are verbs that basically just say that something exists or something exists in a certain way. The most common one is be, but there are others. Here's a couple of examples. My grandfather was a farmer. If my grandfather was a farmer, probably my grandmother was too. Harold seems like a nice person. So was, seems, these are verbs that really just tell us that this thing existed, that it was. They're not really actions. So there you have it. These are the minimum requirements for a basic sentence. Subject, predicate. And if all sentences were basic like these, it would be really easy to be sure that they were correct, right? All of these we've looked at, okay, pretty straightforward. Subject, predicate, we've got it. Punctuate, capitalize and put a period at the end. It's pretty straightforward. And believe me, I've seen writers who have taken this strategy to try and avoid errors. Simple subject, simple predicate, again. It's terrible. So you can't really write that way. In most cases anyway, we want to make our writing more exciting, more interesting, more informative. So we add things, we add details. For example, my older sister finally sold her house. The cute puppies are playing on the sofa. Geology interests me more than any other subject. Good, clear, rich sentences require careful attention to detail. My grandmother, once again, my grandfather and grandmother were both farmers in southeast Poland. Harold seems like an exceptionally nice person. Now, we could get into what all of these added things are called, adverbs and adjectives and prepositional phrases and so on, but all that's not so important for our purposes right now. The important thing right now is to know that regardless of what else there might be in a sentence, you gotta have a subject and a predicate. Finally, and of course, sentences can get way more complicated. You can add all sorts of information. My older sister finally sold her house after having it on the market for almost 6 months. The cute little Dalmatian puppies are playing on my grandmother's favorite sofa. This can go on and on and on. There's really no limit. You can also put clauses together. My maternal grandfather was a farmer in southeast Poland, and my mother's father was a banker in Chicago. Harold seems like a nice person until you really get to know him. Now, these are examples of coordination and subordination, which we're going to look at in further detail in the next video. Just remember, no matter what else you have in the mix, to have a sentence, you have to have a subject and a predicate. If you don't have both of those, you don't have a sentence. You might have a sentence fragment, part of a sentence. If you have more than one subject-predicate combination, then you need to put them together in specific ways, in certain ways, that are grammatically legal to do. If you don't do that, if you put more than one subject-predicate combination together and you don't do it right, then you end up with problems like run-ons and comma splices, which we will look at in the next video. Sentence structure 2, run-ons and comma splices. So, that's all for today. Thanks for watching.